Good afternoon. My name is Jane Weitzman, and I'm a JDC Vice President and past Chair of the Archives Committee. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. We are thrilled that so many of you have joined in from around the world. The JDC Archives holds the records of JDC since its creation about 105 years ago. As such, it is one of the most important repositories of modern Jewish history. The JDC Archives, Artifacts, and Ephemera collection contains close to 1,000 works, ranging from posters and illuminated records to precious artwork, religious items, and gifts from Jewish communities around the world. These unique treasures offer a rich historical overview of JDC's relief activities over the past century in 90 countries. Given the visual and dynamic nature of these objects, the collection helps to enrich and complement the JDC Archives' text, photo, oral history, and film holdings. Bureaucratic correspondence and reports come alive when partnered with the wide range of mixed media objects that reflect the social fabric of global communities and the humanitarian response to monumental historical events. Our speaker today, Abra Cohen, has been an archivist in the JDC Archives since July 2015. She holds an MA in Jewish Art and Visual Culture from the Jewish Theological Seminary and has led the project to rehouse, digitize, and expand the JDC Archives collection of artifacts and ephemera. Before coming to JDC, she worked as a Jewish art consultant, cataloging a private collection of Torah pointers and conducting art historical research for a boutique architectural firm, resulting in a digital index of liturgical furniture and ceremonial objects. The title of her lecture today is If Objects Could Talk. Our format is that the speaker will present for 45 minutes, and this will be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Please note that your microphones are turned off, and we will take questions via the Q&A function. You can send us questions at any time during the lecture. Abra will now start.
Thank you, Jane, for that warm introduction. And I just want to take a moment to thank my colleagues who have helped so much during this presentation, Isabel Rohr and Jeff Edelstein for their technical support, as well as Misha Mitzel and Linda Levy, Director of the JDC Global Archives, who will be joining later today. And welcome everyone to If Objects Could Talk. I'm delighted to take you on this geographical journey through JDC history, using artifacts and ephemera from the JDC Archives to show you the way. Many say that they've never heard of the humanitarian aid organization, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, better known as JDC, and even less know that JDC has an archive, let alone that this archive has artifacts. But I'm here to tell you today that we do, and not only do these objects illuminate JDC history, they also shed light on the experience of JDC aid recipients over the past century. And before we start this trip, I just want to give you some background about the artifact collection. The collection was established in 2014, and as Jane mentioned, it contains close to 1,000 works, ranging from posters and illuminated records, as she said, and artwork, and gifts from communities that have been helped. I won't go into depth listing all of our examples, but there are quite a few. It's really a wide range of materials that includes art and religious and ceremonial objects, as well as plaques and awards that were given to JDC staff members, as well as correspondence, posters, institutional ephemera, newspaper clippings, albums, and scrapbooks, even textiles. So you may ask, how did this collection come to be, and where did these items come from? Well, it wasn't really until the centennial exhibit of JDC at the New York Historical Society in 2014 that many of these objects were recognized for their own intrinsic value. This occurred when the curator at the museum, Marilyn Satin Kushner, asked us, "What objects do you have that would be striking to be on display?" And while curating the exhibit, it became clear that the presence of artifacts and ephemera from the archives helped immensely to illustrate and bring to life JDC's effort and impact over the years. Thus, this exhibition was really the catalyst for the establishment of this collection. In essence, what we had on our hands was a hidden collection, either buried in boxes or embedded in other collections. But efforts have been made to separate those materials and bring them to life. However, in addition to the materials that we already had, we have also been actively collecting items connected to JDC history. We have acquired some items from auction, and generally this is done when a donor has come forth and offered to cover these costs. Special thanks to Jane Weitzman here for bringing such items to our attention and for her generosity. You'll be seeing some of those objects today during the presentation. We also conduct research to acquire new items. Outreach happens when people come to us with research inquiries or genealogical questions, and a conversation ensues oftentimes, and materials present themselves. All of these materials are then cataloged, which entails rehousing so that they are preserved properly in our climate-controlled facility. And as we rehouse, we also photograph and create digital records for each item. The result is an online database that has select artifact records open to the public and available for everyone. This exposure has led researchers, curators, museums to learn about our materials, and this has often resulted in some loans for outside exhibits. We've really been able to gain intellectual control and allow these materials to be brought to service. And now we have a museum-worthy collection, which I'm excited to show you. I do want to mention that many of the items in the collection do not come with an established provenance. In fact, research is required in order to surmise how they made their way into the collection originally. So we analyze the who, what, where, when, why of each item, and we conduct contextual research in other collections within the archives. For instance, we establish a general time period, geographic location, and then of an object, and then we look into the text collection to see what was JDC doing then or there, and it helps us to understand the provenance. We also interview JDC staff who have institutional knowledge, and we look at past JDC publications and digests. Of course, it's also important for us to look outside our collection at auction catalogs, museum holdings, exhibition catalogs, online resources, and of course, academic journals, books, art historical compendiums. So let's hear what these objects have to say. We're going to start with one item that was once lost within our collections, but has now been found. Originally listed as an unidentified cask, upon further inspection, a mark was found on the bottom of this item which read RHMF. We gleaned that the mark was an abbreviation for the Rheinische Musicians Fabrik, an ammunition factory in Dusseldorf, Germany. Instantly, the cylindrical brass holder was transformed into a World War I cartridge case. So during World War I, the vestiges of war were converted into trench art. As the first major industrialized conflict, World War I produced a surplus of raw materials and consequently also psychological trauma. Therefore, using materials like shell casings, cartridges, and bullets to construct art provided mental R&R for soldiers and helped to pass the time for prisoners of war and civilians alike. Here you can see two examples: practical objects, such as a tobacco jar and a jug, that were imprinted with the style of the creator. But one of the most common types of trench art was made from shell casings. Meant to be collected and sent back for reloading, they often never made it, and instead emerged as a popular memento which sparked a cottage industry. The shell casing in the JDC archives has a Hebrew signature, which identifies it as a product of Raphael Abraham Shalem, born 1888. He studied at the Bezalel School of Arts and Crafts during the years 1913 to 1918. Bezalel was founded in 1906 in Jerusalem by the Latvian Jewish artist Boris Schatz, with the aim to develop a unique art style combining biblical subject matter, Jewish motifs and symbolism with Art Nouveau and Persian aesthetics. At Bezalel, there was a practice among students to decorate World War I shell casings with biblical imagery and traditional Jewish themes and symbols, as well as scenes of Palestine. It's interesting to note that even before the establishment of Bezalel, it was common for Jewish folk artists to create works on religious themes, like having depictions of holy sites. And these were things that were oftentimes sold to tourists. But our shell case in the archives is no different. As you can see, it's engraved with an image of the Western Wall on one side and 10 Commandments inside a Jewish star on the other. And this shell casing really serves as a reminder of JDC's early activities in Palestine during World War I. In fact, it was a telegram sent on August 31st, 1914 by US Ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau, to his friend Jacob Schiff in New York, requesting $50,000 in aid for Palestinian Jewry who had been cut off from traditional sources of aid due to the outbreak of World War I. And this is what got the ball rolling for the creation of JDC. Within days, the money was raised and sent to the Yishuv in Ottoman Palestine. And with that fateful action, the mission of JDC began to take shape. Throughout the war years, even after the United States entered the conflict in April 1917, JDC found ways to channel the funds raised by its constituent groups to Jews suffering from hunger and malnutrition, who had lost homes and livelihoods in Europe and in Palestine. In fact, in March 1915, some $1.5 million was sent to Palestine on the SS Vulcan, along with 900 tons of food and medicine. And continuing into the 1920s, you can see in these photos, JDC was active in the region. Though JDC may not have been in the trenches alongside the troops during World War I, you can see that JDC support was felt far and wide. Making our way to Europe, our next item was actually loaned to the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia for their exhibit 1917, How 1 Year Changed the World, in 2017. It is a letter of recognition from Jacopo, the Jewish Committee for the Relief of War Victims, penned in Vilna, then Poland, now Lithuania, in 1919. Launched in Russia in 1914, Jacopo established local branches throughout Eastern Europe to aid Jewish victims of pogroms and World War I. JDC supported the organization's efforts to transport refugees and supply food and clothing, shelter, and even childcare. They also helped to provide vocational training, medical, and financial aid. Speaking on behalf of the aid recipients, this letter, written in Yiddish orthography, recounts that JDC funds and relief work guarded thousands of children from despair, brought life to thousands of orphans, elderly, and widows, brought home thousands of homeless, supported Jewish artisans, workers, and colonists, and brought consolation, hope, and encouragement to the whole Jewish community. 83 delegates from 74 cities and towns came together to express these words for the aid provided by their American brothers, specifically JDC representatives. You can actually see their names in the upper right-hand corner if you can read the print, which is quite small here, but it's listed JDC representatives, Dr. Boris Bogan, Mr. Jacob Bilikoff, and Dr. Isidore Hirschfield. The towns that were present are actually listed alphabetically, with each letter of the Hebrew alphabet capitalized in a stylized manner. This is also on the right-hand side. The resulting effect resembles an acrostic, emphasizing really the sweeping territory that was affected by the aid. Additionally, there are other beautiful elements that really make the letter stand out as more than just a thank you letter. These decorative elements were hand-drawn by Ben-Sion Zuckerman. His signature can be glimpsed in the bottom center underneath the geometric pot. Flanking the text, a garland frame of colorful flowers and vines winds its way from the geometric pot, while below an etched frieze of refugees is featured. The frieze is executed with such precision that one can see both the anger and sadness on the faces of the refugees on the right as they turn their backs away from their destroyed homes. They appear downcast and withdrawn, whereas on the left, you can see them standing upright and almost happy in front of their reconstructed homes. The border and this frieze transform this letter into a work of art, with the finished product acting as a symbol of commemoration. Those who created the work no doubt wish to honor their champions in a tangible and lasting way. Moving further east, I take you to the newly established Soviet Union, where JDC established agricultural settlements and promoted an agrarian lifestyle for Russian Jewish families with the creation of AgroJoint, the American Jewish Joint Agricultural Corporation, in July 1924. 70,000 Jews were resettled in the Ukraine and Crimea and taught to work the land and manage livestock in communally run settlements. In 1926, the Russian-French painter Issachar Rybak spent 2 months in such Jewish villages in the provinces of Kherson and in the Crimea. His illustrated album on the Jewish fields of the Ukraine explores the daily ritual of farming for these Jewish agriculturists. The portfolio, which features 25 reproductions of drawings and paintings of field laborers, is imprinted with Rybak's Impressionist style and Cubist tendencies. After graduating from art school in Kiev in 1916, Rybak was an instrumental figure in the Yiddish avant-garde of the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution, as well as a member of the Kulturlied and November group, the German Expressionists. Rybak's career spanned countries, decades, and artistic genres. Observing Jewish farmers at work, Rybak recorded his perspectives in this pictorial portfolio. As you can see from a photo of the period on the right, his images on the left capture life on the settlements. You can see the machinery, the colonists at work in the fields. However, in contrast to the photo, you'll see that his perspective is decidedly different from reality, and I'll go into that in a minute. But just consider how large the figure in the foreground appears in relation to the machinery at his right. In the foreword to this album, Rybak writes of viewing the healthy, sunburnt, wind-beaten men and women who were a perfect joy and indeed revealed to him new colors. He utilized these new colors in the first illustration of the album at right, which depicts a laborer at rest amid his fellow workers. The vibrant, expressionistic shades are intense, casting glowing light around the picture, as if it were a dream. After all, the images are meant to be a fleeting visual impression of a new world conveyed to Rybak, requiring original colors and proportions. In fact, Rybak even mentions that these figures stand in stark contrast to the inhabitants of the Ukrainian towns in the Pale of Settlement where he grew up. And he credits this change to the Jewish expert agronomists who acted as teachers. Under their guidance, Rybak sees a transformation of character and livelihood, which he depicts in a modern mindset. Cubist influences are at work with Rybak's fractured perspective, situating the farmer in the forefront, as you saw with the previous colonists, towering over the men to his side. The picture plane is flattened. Furthermore, brushstrokes are converted into geometric patterns, executed in short, repetitive spurts on grass, hay, and pant legs. This fragmented environment really aptly captures the new life of agricultural settlers, embarking on untouched terrain with help from JDC. Now we travel to Hungary in 1939. This is a commemorative album from the Hungarian Jewish community, celebrating JDC's 25th anniversary in 1939, decorated with watercolor drawings designed by A. Rusty. Each page of the album is a letter of gratitude from a Jewish establishment or community in Hungary, thanking JDC for its funding and support, and every single page is adorned with a watercolor symbol. The album really illustrates the vibrancy of the Hungarian Jewish community on the eve of its destruction. And I've always been curious about the symbol on the front of the cover, and only recently realized that it resembles a lamp. And when I think of a lamp, I think of a genie, and genies usually grant wishes, which I think is appropriate here because this album really represents the good wishes that the Hungarian Jewish community is bestowing on JDC. And as you can see, the album is really personalized in its address to JDC. They say, the Hungarian Jews send a bunch of greetings to the Jubilee. And I find that this language is just as expressive as the imagery that you can see represented. They also say, instead of withering flowers, allow us to tell by the following that we are indebted to you forever, and allow our hearts to spread your praise. It's true, this album has survived much longer than any flowers might have, and this is all the more poignant because of what the community experienced during the war. The Hungarian Jewish community was one of the most colorful Jewish groups in Europe and one of the most important Jewish centers in Eastern Europe in terms of their number and position in the country. All shades of religious thought were represented. They also participated widely in political life, beginning as early as 1855. Budapest boasted numerous religious schools, Jewish hospitals, and several children's homes. And prior to 1940, 5 Jewish periodicals appeared in Hungary. JDC started its work in Austria-Hungary in 1950, working with the Israelitische Allianz in Vienna to help supply food, clothing, and medicine to refugees fleeing war areas. And after World War I, JDC supported reconstructive work and childcare. However, with the passing of anti-Jewish legislation in 1938, the economic situation of Jews in Hungary became more difficult. And so in 1939, JDC established the Hungarian Jewish Relief Committee in Budapest, where 2/3 of Hungarian Jews were then living. And it was through this agency that relief funds were distributed for Hungarian Jews and Jewish refugees from surrounding areas. Despite this hardship, the sheer amount of these decorated letters shows just how thriving the community was. There are 98 letters in total. And within these letters, you can see that there are feelings of despair, yet there's also hope and gratitude. I was touched by a letter from the Hungarian Jewish head office in which they write, "We are feeling the brotherly assistance of the joint again, day after day, which gives a noble example for the ancient word, Kol Yisrael Chaverim, or all of Israel, all Jewish people are friends." And of course, really, I have to focus on the imagery for a moment because the album is really a fine example of Hungarian folk art with these colorful patterns that resemble almost embroidery. However, the artist has found a way to weave in Jewish symbols, like the Torah and the Menorah that is seen here. To me, this design mirrors the Hungarian Jewish community itself, assimilated and connected to the culture of Hungary, yet still maintaining a strong identity. This is similar to the way in which some Jewish ritual objects often take on the flavor of the culture in which they were made. And this album is no different. In effect, it's almost become an illuminated manuscript. As we enter the war period, I want to take you to Shanghai, where we witness life through the eyes of a budding photographer. 25-year-old Gertrude Glanz documented her time in Shanghai by compiling a scrapbook. She was a Jewish refugee from Austria and was able to escape the Nazi onslaught along with her parents, Margaret and Jakob. Her album is composed of photographs, residence certificates, business cards, IDs, and bills from her journey to and sojourn in Shanghai. The pages really offer an intimate look at the continuation of life despite world upheaval And her creative hand can be seen throughout as she documents the people that she's met and the places she's been. There are portraits of individuals who shared her trip by ship to Shanghai, as well as animal headshots, Shanghai street scenes, and even a visit to an army base. One feels as if they are experiencing Shanghai through the photographer's eyes, witnessing her attempts to capture life in the studio and on the street, all amidst the backdrop of a new and exotic city for her. The sepia-toned images capture the happy memories, but ephemera, as you can see in the upper right, such as the Shanghai Hebrew Relief Society and Shelter House identification card, stamped with Shanghai Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, reminds us that despite the smiling faces, war was still brewing and daily necessities were lacking. About 18,000 Jewish refugees had fled to Shanghai, China by the end of 1941. It was the only free port in the world willing to grant them asylum without passports or guarantees of an ultimate destination. And in cooperation with the local committee for the assistance of European Jewish refugees, JDC representatives Laura Margolis and Manuel Siegel built a well-oiled emergency relief operation, including hostels to house the refugees, food programs, and other critical services that sustained refugees for the duration of the war. A Shanghai refugee client list from 1950 indicates that with JDC's help, Gertrude and her mother were able to secure passage to the US. Gertrude eventually became a professional photographer and artist. In fact, in the 1950s, she opened a photography studio in Queens, Trudy Studios, specializing in portraiture. And this scrapbook of hers came to us through the donation of her stepson. Many Jews were not so lucky to escape war-torn Europe, and instead sought assistance in the displaced persons DP camps following World War II. Our next artifact comes from that period. Cigarette lighters, also called Zippos, were popular and abundant in the 1940s. In fact, the company itself solely manufactured for the US Army during World War II, with official lighters boasting unit crests and division insignia. As smoking was a cultural norm, lighters were used daily out of necessity, and when lit, the badges were illuminated, signaling others with silent messages of contact. In the post-war period, cigarettes were considered a valuable commodity. They were used as currency at times, and one very special cigarette lighter was donated to the JDC archives by Sheila Spiro, the stepdaughter of Joseph Fink, a former JDC staff member. Joe Fink was director of AJDC Berlin in the late 1940s. He was passionate about his work in the DP camps and an ardent advocate for refugees. JDC partnered with other relief organizations to provide food, clothing, equipment, and immigration assistance to survivors in these DP camps, including Baknane, whose name is listed, rather engraved, on the back of this lighter. Baknane, situated near Stuttgart, was home to around 500 Jewish displaced persons in 1946. And there, JDC helped establish vocational programs and schools, and even sent a Sefer Torah in Yiddish newspaper to the inhabitants. So who made this lighter? The story goes that it was a group of boys from the Baknane DP camp who gave Joe the lighter as a token of thanks for helping them escape over the Italian mountains to join the Bricha movement, the organized illegal emigration from Eastern Europe into the Allied occupied zones and Palestine in the post-war period. These boys were most likely survivors originating from Eastern Europe, attested to in a letter that Joe wrote to the Joint, dated November 25th, 1945, in which he relays that most of the DPs that he worked with were from Radom, Poland. Now, I have not found definite documentation describing these boys. However, the effort that Joe might have made for these individuals to elicit such a token of thanks is evident in documentation I found about him helping another young survivor, Emil Hecht. In a letter from November 1947, he writes to the Committee on Cultural Affairs, saying that Emil has an earnest desire to study Jewish history and literature, and Joe asks for books to be sent to Emil, offering to bear all costs for such an expense. And you can see from the response on the right that Joe's wish was granted. And from registration cards in our names index, I found that Emil and his wife later left Europe for the USA. Now let's decipher what's really on the insignia on the Zippo. The motto on the front of the lighter reads, Ha'apel na'apela, which loosely translates to, let's run the British blockade. A saying that embodied the determined spirit of Jewish refugees attempting to enter British Mandate Palestine. Accompanying the words, the symbols on the facade appear to be an amalgamation of two organizations. The two sheaves of wheat, which usually sandwich a sword, represent the emblem of the Palmach, the elite corps of the Haganah, the underground army of Jewish settlers established in 1941. Now the yellow star, Jewish star, superimposed on three bands of blue and white, stands for the Jewish Infantry Brigade Group. It was a military formation of the British Army composed of Jews from the Yishuv. It was formed in late 1944, and some members assisted survivors to emigrate illegally as part of Aliyah Bet. The essence of the Bricha movement is really engraved on the lighter's surface, signifying the maker's journey. And it's clear that with this gift, Joe was symbolically linked to the formation of the State of Israel and the hopeful future of survivors after the war. In the aftermath of World War II, JDC's far-reaching efforts to rebuild and sustain European Jewry touched upon every aspect of Jewish religious, communal, and cultural life. JDC distributed food, clothing, tools, equipment, and educational materials to the DP camps of Germany, Austria, and Italy, which were housing close to 250,000 individuals by 1947. JDC also brought in religious materials, tens of thousands of machzorim, Jewish prayer books, and talitot, prayer shawls, into the DP camps. This commitment to revitalizing Jewish life included the production and dispatch of religious supplies for the high holidays. The photo on the left shows the high holiday distribution from 1948. Included in this particular distribution were 5,000 special prayer books printed by the JDC in the US zone of Germany, 500 kippot, 2,000 talitot, over 120,000 candles, holy Torahs, and shofarot. One such talit was returned to the JDC almost 70 years after it had originally been distributed. This particular talit was received by Joseph Friedman while he was interned at the Muhlenberg DP camp in Kassel, Germany. Joseph was born in Cluj, Romania, and had been liberated from Buchenwald. As you can see, this talit bears the printed inscription of gift from joint along the edge. Threadbare and stained, it shows how much it was used and treasured by Joseph. And when it was donated to us by Joseph's son, Stephen Friedman, we even received the talit bag that Joseph had made for the talit, evidence that it was truly something that he cherished. In its decay, we really see one man's reconnection to his Jewish identity and connection to religion after the destruction of the war. It also tells the story of an organization that cared for its clients, both body and soul. Hanukkah supplies were also distributed in the DP camps. Along with candles, menorahs were given to survivors in order to celebrate the holiday. Another example of a ritual object distributed by the JDC is this menorah, which was purchased at auction. The menorah was distributed by the JDC because they were able to manufacture it with the help of the joint, as is listed. It was made in 1947 in Marktredwitz, Germany, and it was made by those working in the workshop, liberated Jews who were making this for use among Jewish displaced persons. Today it's very rare. Only 351 were manufactured in the ceramic workshop of the joint between 1947 and 1948. It's made up of a tree cut down almost to a stump with a branch growing out from its side. You can see that leaves are sprouting, symbolizing a sustained life. The small branch serves as the menorah's shamash, or helper candle. And the menorah really illustrates that in spite of 2/3 of European Jewry being erased from existence, a nation was not lost. There was yet hope, and it was reborn. Still in the DP period, we move from Europe to Cyprus. In August 1946, when the British government initiated a policy of deporting Jews who tried to enter Palestine illegally, JDC stepped in and offered aid to the refugees, marooned on this island of Cyprus in internment camps. This support included supplementary food rations, clothing, medical care, vocational training programs, and even art classes in the form of the Rootenberg Seminar. Seminar was taught by Naftali Bezem, a young graduate of the Bezalel School. He went on to become a renowned artist himself, exhibiting internationally as a painter, muralist, and sculptor. And a record of these classes exists in the form of an album of lino cuts, along with additional prints that we have. The images really capture daily life in the camps, ranging from mundane activities such as relaxing, reading, eating, to religious ceremonies such as marriage and blessing of the new moon. And as you can see already from the cover page, juxtaposed against a photo from the internment camps, the images were true to life. You see the crowded quarters, you see people fenced in, and you see the rounded huts in which Jews were living. Now, the album itself was printed 120 times on a specially constructed printing press, and its title is Begarush Kafrisin, Exile in Cyprus. This title calls to mind the collective Jewish memory of the Babylonian exile centuries ago, which no doubt resonated with the Jewish refugees. And this particular print of the album was presented to JDC by the pupils of the Rootenberg Seminar as a token of thanks for their support. Now, Bezem believed in the social function of art, public art for the masses, and as someone who had suffered familial losses during the war and a loss of identity, he was a fitting teacher to connect with those on Cyprus who had experienced the same. And together they were able to use art to illustrate their reality and find purpose in their plight. And the lino cuts really appear an appropriate technique to portray the stark reality of life on Cyprus. Caught in an almost purgatory, the contrasting black and white colors of the images capture the harsh terrain and the bleak atmosphere of the camps. However, by choosing to display and illustrate their surroundings, the detainees were able to breathe life back into the camps. Because as you can see of this photo of Laundry Day, life went on. Here in the image at left, barbed wire, usually brittle and tangled, seems to be unraveling before our eyes. It's almost like wisps of smoke dancing with the waves, unfolding to let the weary travelers pass and enter the promised land, what was to be Israel. And thanks to the programming and aid from JDC, this sort of creativity and exploration arose in the camps, and it really was able to turn that monotony into a powerful source of inspiration and hope. There were other workshops that existed within the Rootenberg Seminar. There was a sculpture course taught by Zev Ben Tzvi, a Jewish artist, and students there worked with gypsum and stone. And here we have a box that was made in this workshop. It is titled Zichron Mekafrisin, which means remembrance from Cyprus, made of limestone. And within this box, on the cover, you can see that there is still the barbed wire that is being shown. You see a figure that is really fenced in, trapped. And there's just a little bit of hope in the upper left-hand corner. You see water, you see ship. Again, this desire, this hope that they too could exit these camps. However, it is important to note that this lone figure is larger than anything else around him, a master of his own future. And again, there is power in this portrayal. And as you're beginning to see, JDC's work has spanned globally, and for those who have been touched by the joint, the name is not easily forgotten. And such is the case with this next item. It's a textile that could serve either as a Torah ark covering, or that could be hung from an amud, the podium, from whence the chazan or the cantor prays. So this particular textile is engraved, or inscribed rather, with Jewish emblems and biblical references. The epitaph reads, "From the young Shmuel Avraham Shamsian from Tehran, presented to the office of the Joint in America, 5736, or roughly circa 1975. This inscription identifies the artist of the textile as Mr. Shamsian from Iran. The addition of the young to his name is a common moniker for Iranian men in their 20s and 30s. And though we do not have more information about Mr. Shamsian's connection to the joint, it's evident that whatever his interaction was with the organization, it left a strong impression, owing to this meaningful gift that he bestowed upon JDC. So the item is called a shiviti in Hebrew due to the psalm that's inscribed on the canvas. Shiviti is the first word in the Hebrew text of Psalm 16:8, meaning I have placed. The complete verse reads, I have placed the Lord always before me. Additionally, Psalm 67 is arranged into a representation of the ancient temple's 7-branched menorah. The colorful lettering here, flanked by 2 Jewish stars in the right and left-hand corners. Shiviti amulets, plaques, and textiles have long been made by Jewish communities around the world, and they're used for meditation over God's name. Though traditionally a religious artifact, the item here still resonates, I believe, with the work of the joint, because as the inscribed psalm conjures the concept of thinking outside one's personal sphere, so too has JDC done, as JDC strives to work in 70 countries worldwide, going wherever necessary to alleviate suffering. In the 1970s, JDC funded social, educational, and medical programs in Iran, enabling 19,000 students to attend Jewish schools in the Alliance Israelite Universelle, Ozar HaTorah, and ORT systems. JDC also assisted with daycare and cash allowances to families, aid to university students, clothing distribution, a training school for nurses attached to the Jewish hospital, a youth center, a school health program, and a Jewish hospital in Tehran that assisted 3,700 individuals each month. Given that JDC operations ended in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution and the overthrow of the Shah, this shiviti marks the decades of service of the joint in Iran. In Islamic culture, textiles such as this shiviti define space, designating time and place. As we know, time can be fleeting, but this tangible tribute to the joint by an Iranian artist means that the joint's devoted efforts were not forgotten. Finally, we end this journey in Africa. Nestled in Rwanda's lush green landscape of the eastern province, overlooking Lake Mugesera, sits the Agaoza Shalom Youth Village, home to orphaned and traumatized adolescents. Opened in 2008 with help from the JDC, it has become a thriving village, complete with group homes, a high school, science and computer labs, land for farming, and counseling and medical facilities. In gratitude for JDC's efforts in helping to build the village, 2 wooden signs were presented to the organization in 2009. You see, when genocide struck in Rwanda in 1994, thousands of children were left without parents and extended family. Their plight mirrored the situation that existed in Israel following World War II, when an influx of Jewish orphans from Europe arrived in the new country. Hagaoza Shalom's founder, Anne Hyman, was struck by the similarity, so she partnered with JDC to learn more about how Israel dealt with this sociological dilemma. Her questions were answered in the model of the Yemen Ord Residential Youth Village, which was set up to care for children in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And later, it was even adapted to assist underserved populations and new immigrants. Agahoza Shalom echoes the same principles that were established at Yemen Ord, the principles of healing or repair, tikkun in Hebrew. JDC had a hand in purchasing the land, acting as a fiduciary, and planning the school's curriculum. And after 5 years, JDC stepped back to allow the village to become self-sustaining. It's a guiding principle of JDC's work. And as a token of thanks for this assistance, these 2 wooden signs were given to Dr. William Recant, JDC's Assistant Executive Vice President at the time. Produced in Rwanda from local wood, the materiality of the gifts is significant, as is their imagery. Malleable yet durable, the wood can be compared to the children of the village, who, though scarred by war, are strong enough to move forward with rehabilitation. Additionally, since the village's location was chosen purposely, wanting children to be immersed in nature and to see far, to go far, the wood calls to mind this natural setting. In fact, both signs pay homage to the village's backdrop. You can see that the sign in the center has the ASYV logo, several huts erected under the shade of palm trees, a dwelling protected from the elements organically, while the other sign displays a handshake held up by another pair of hands, superimposed over the geographic location of the village. Engraved with the topography of the region, the signs memorialize the environment where the healing occurs. And I think that the hands are really significant here. You have the initial handshake, which represents friendship between Rwanda and Israel, but you also have the hands that lift up the entire sign. And these really represent the lives that were lifted by the same model generations before. Their memory now working to do the same for the children at ASYV. While JDC's aid can be viewed in numbers and statistics, you've seen today that each item reminds us that every staff worker, every aid recipient had a story, and with each individual, the power to contribute to the survival and history of Jewish people and humanity at large. And Marilyn Kushner, the curator from the New York Historical Society, had an important point. This multimedia collection really makes history come alive. And we have incredible examples of art history that talk about Jewish history and general history. And I've really only touched on the objects that we have in the collection, as you can see here, like this iconic publicity share poster from the early 1900s, or this chuppah from the DP camps, which was purchased at auction by Jane. And now that you've seen some highlights of the collection, I invite you to view more of our artifacts and web resources. If you visit us online at archives.jdc.org, you're welcome to search the collection for yourself and view our other web resources. And if you or a family member has a connection to JDC, please let us know. Please reach out. Feel free to email us at archives-mal@jdc.org. We're always excited to hear about people who have a connection to JDC. And lastly, of course, please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we're always sharing news and events and happenings, photos, and even more artifacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abra. That was fascinating. And now, Linda Levy, JDC Director of Global Archives, and Senior JDC Archivist Misha Mitzel will answer your questions. And they'll join Abra, who will also answer them. Well, the first question actually is to me. It says, where is the JDC chuppah? The JDC chuppah, can y'all hear me? Okay, the JDC chuppah is on loan from JDC to Yad Vashem. And I can also tell you that 2 people that I know of were married under it. It had to be borrowed back for the last wedding from Yad Vashem. One is a JDC Entwine member who's now on our board, and the other was a staff member. And just as an aside, I probably shouldn't tell you all this, but one of the marriages took and one didn't. So there was no great benefit for us, but I was so excited when I found it. And I first tried to threaten to the auction house. It was a small auction house in upstate New York. And I said, you know, that's stolen property and you really should give it back. And the owner wasn't buying that. So I ended up bidding on it. The next question is, can the artifacts be viewed somewhere?
Right, I'm happy to answer this. As I mentioned, we have an online database where select artifact records are available and open to the public. I would recommend visiting our site, archives.jdc.org, and there are several ways to get to the database on our website. You can either click on collections in the upper right-hand corner, and there you will be taken to the artifacts collection. It's listed as one of our many collections, and you can simply type there items that you might be searching for. These can be general geographic locations or even type of objects. You're also so that would be the easiest way, I believe. So as these items are housed in our offsite climate-controlled facility, and so we do not have these open to the public. However, there have been loans to different museums where the objects were on display. I mentioned the 1917 exhibit. And I think, Linda, you recall we have had other loans where things were on display?
Some of the objects were on display at the New York Historical Society in 2014. There are other places as well. They're not coming to mind this moment.
Yeah, so we've definitely, it's been very exciting to see that the items in the collection that we have housed away safely have really been able to be seen by many individuals who have come to exhibits at different museums throughout, the New York area and Philadelphia. So that's been very nice.
Okay, we have two questions that are about the same thing. And Misha, I think you would be a good person to answer these questions. The juxtaposition of the Ryback works with the JDC archives photographs was quite striking. Do we know whether Ryback worked from these or other photographs in creating his images? And the next question, which is related, is, it says, thank you. This is all fascinating. I'm intrigued by the collective settlements in the early years of the USSR. Did they continue? What happened to them during the Ukrainian famine? Did some of those individuals eventually go to Palestine, give up farming, and move to cities? Were some of them ideologically committed communists or just people trying to survive? Thank you for all the research.
Okay. I can answer the first question, actually, if that's all right, about whether he worked from photographs or in person. And actually, it says in the foreword to his album that he had heard about these settlements and he wanted to see them for himself. So Ryback did go visit and he created the images from what he saw in person. Misha, you're welcome to continue.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Abra, for your brilliant presentation. It was fascinating. If we are talking about program for needy Jews in Soviet Union called Abra Joint. Abra Joint was established in 1924, and the solution came in May 1938 by the decision of Politburo. There were around 250 collective farms in Ukraine and Crimea. Question was about ideological motivation of these people. Rather no, it was people who were deprived of their rights, And idea of JDC was some kind of social engineering to make them self-substantial people to work on a field. Program was partly successful, but only partly because it wasn't possible to create agricultural paradise in needy country. Question was about famine in Ukraine. Of course, Jewish collective farms suffered in the same way like surrounding population. And end of Abra joint program was quite tragic. Nobody left for Palestine, with the exception of few people who survived war, returned to Crimea, and then immigrated to Israel in 90s. There were few such people, elderly people. But end was tragic, connected with great terror in Soviet Union. Around 40 managers, agronomists were arrested. 70 of them were executed. Rest simply died in Gulag. We are talking about only agronomists, but around 200 regular farmers also were arrested. Thank you.
Okay, the next one says that Abra was incredible. How did you choose this work? And what's the most important thing that you've learned in your time at the joint?
Thank you, Labe. I would say that I've always loved museums, and growing up I loved art history, but it wasn't until I spent time at Beit Hatfutzot in Israel learning about, it's a museum of the Jewish peoplehood, and to see that there could be this connection between art history and Jewish history that really excited me, to be able to tell the story of Jewish people, Jewish history visually through art. So that really inspired me to want to continue my studies. And I have to admit that before I came to JDC, I didn't know that JDC existed. And now, after all of this research and really learning about how integral JDC has been in touching on all aspects of Jewish history throughout the last century, I can't believe that it was a secret in my life. So if I were, I mean, I've learned so many incredible tidbits of information from all of these objects that comment on very important historical events, but just really knowing that JDC has existed and that we're now able to tell the story through such multidimensional ways and how that comments on Jewish history at large, for me, it's been really an honor, and it's really allowed my passion to take shape. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question asks about the eyeglasses that were in the photograph at the end. She said, thought you might have mentioned it and missed it, but you didn't. So would you like to say something about them now?
I have to be honest, I'm not sure which eyeglasses you're referring to.
Linda,
I can answer this. I can answer this. The eyeglasses actually were the eyeglasses of an elderly Soviet Jewish client of the JDC. Asher Ostrin, who is now our interim CEO, did a home visit in a remote region of the Soviet Union many years ago already, and came upon this man whose glasses were kept together with wire and tape. And the man indicated that that he had those glasses since he left the Army after World War II. And we were quite moved and surprised that these glasses had lasted and had to last that long. And we saw to it that the man got a new prescription and a new pair of glasses, and in exchange, he allowed Asher to take those glasses back to the joint. And that's the story. These glasses actually were included in our centennial exhibit at the New York Historical Society.
Oh, here's one from Susan's zone. The shell casings, what are they made of? And were artisan tools used for engraving or found tools like nails?
Yes, so the shell casings were made of brass. That was what was used in creating this, these war materials. So that one is brass. And Bezalel also had an artisan workshop. They had several workshops. They were interested in creating, you know, practical items that were kind of engraved with these Jewish themes. So I'm sure that those sorts of tools were also used when it came to working with the brass shell casings.
Okay, I think that's it. Those are all the questions we have. I just wanted to say a few words in closing. First of all, when I went to the former Soviet Union for the first time, I went with Linda, and there were people there and on subsequent trips who told us how grateful they were to us because we had helped them in their youth through AgroJoint, and here we were helping them again in their old age. So that was very, very moving. And I really want to thank all of you, Abra, Linda, Misha. That was just terrific. I think everyone enjoyed it. I also want to talk about our next program, our next webinar, which will be on October 22nd. Sarah Halpern will give a lecture on the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee to the rescue in Shanghai from 1941 to 1951. The program is co-sponsored by the Center for Jewish History, and you can register by going to JDC's Facebook page. And in closing, I'd just like to say, please, if you have or if you know of anyone who has any JDC artifacts, encourage them to donate them to the archives instead of putting them in auction. Thank you. Linda, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that many museums around the world utilize the collections of JDC, not only the artifact collection. There are 13 museums around the world today who have works from the JDC archives on exhibit today. They include museums in the United States, in Israel, and a large number of countries around the world, particularly in Europe.
Okay, thank you all very, very much.